Hi everybody. So today I want to talk a little bit about glaze making, specifically making ash glazes. Most of the glazes that I use in my work are based on plant ashes or natural materials in one form or another. So they're a little bit of a different animal than glazes formulated from powdered dry materials that you might buy at your ceramic supply store, in that you never really quite know the composition, the chemical composition of what you're working with. There's nothing that says the particular type of wood ash is so and so many percent silica, so and so many percent potassium, so and so many percent sodium, any of that stuff. You're kind of taking an educated guess. So, first I'm going to talk a little bit about testing glazes. I don't have time to really demonstrate that, but I'm going to talk about how I do tests, and then I'm going to talk about processing ash. So, in front of me, what you see is a set of 21 test tiles that are set up as what's called a triaxial blend. And this method allows you to test three materials against each other in a glaze test to figure out which combination of the three materials, which percentage mixture of those three materials is going to yield the best glaze. So, the way this works is this test tile here is 100% Timothy hay ash. This test tile here is 100% Minspar soda feldspar. And this test tile here is 100% tile 6 kaolin. And each direction, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows in each direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 100%. And each way, that's why it's called a triaxial blend. Each step represents a 20% change in that material's content within the mixture. So here we've got 100% soda feldspar. Here we've got 80% soda feldspar and 20% ash. Here we've got 60% soda feldspar, 40% ash. Here we've got, and so on and so forth. And then in this direction, kaolin is added to the mix because this is 100% kaolin. And in the middle, you have a mixture of all three. That's an incredibly useful tool against, when viewed against something like a line blend test, which is also very effective, but it only tells you how well two materials go together. So if you want to test three, you're better off doing it this way. And you have to do fewer tests in order to get results. I can do all of these ahead of time, weigh these all out in increments, and then dip all of the test tiles and fire them all at once, and I have all my results after one kiln firing. So, that said, I'm going to now talk a little bit about ashes. In this case, specifically, what this bucket is labeled as, Timothy hay ash. So, 1 5-gallon bucket of ash is approximately 1 hay bale. I have a company nearby that sells hay, and they were willing to sell me some slightly moldy hay for a reduced price because it can't be used as livestock feed. And so I burned the whole bale down to ash, and now I've added water to it, and the water basically dissolves the soluble chemicals in the ash, potassium, sodium, basically all of the fluxes, and leaves the silica behind. I want some of those fluxes in my ash, but I don't want all of them in, because if they all remain in the glaze will be way too runny at the temperature that I'm firing. So, I'm going to scoop off this liquid. So I've let the ash settle off, and I'm going to slowly scoop out this clear liquid. The small bits in there are just bits of unburnt hay that are floating. And invariably, I'll get some of the ash in as well. There's kind of really not much you can do about that. And I'm saving this. The reason I'm saving this is because this is really high in those fluxes. And so if I find that my glaze needs a little bit more flux, I can always ladle some of this water or dry it out and ladle some of the powder back into my glaze recipe if it comes up a little bit matte in the test. Which also means that these types of glaze generally always need to be test fired before you can glaze a whole batch of work, because you're just dealing with so many different variables that you never quite know how it's going to come out, unless you're making a batch of glaze with the same batch of raw material that you've already tested in the same proportions and such. So I'm not going to be worried about losing just a little bit of ash. Sometimes if I'm feeling really frugal, I'd let some of this settle back out again and then continue scooping later. But I mean, that's kind of diminishing returns. We're probably only getting rid of a couple grams. So I'm going to put a lid on this, and I'm going to label this. This doesn't just go on a shelf somewhere to be forgotten, and then eventually ask myself what the heck this is. So we're going to label this. This is, I'm trying to write through my camera here. Geez, that's terrible. All right, Timothy Hay Ashley, written in the scariest, horrible handwriting you could imagine. And so this is going to go on a shelf. And this is another thing: never label your lids. Always label your buckets. That way things don't get lost, because lids can always go on different containers. We'll set that aside. So now I'm going to process this down. I'm going to put you folks in a tripod. I've got a blender here. If you have a ball mill, absolutely use a ball mill. It will work much better for this kind of thing. Alright, so got a blender here, and I'm just going to ladle the material in. You want to make sure that you get a good bit of water in with it. You don't want to be, or at least the line in with it. You don't want to be blending down really hard sludge, because this is already hard on your blender to begin with. There we go. So maybe that's a bit much. We'll see. So we're going to get another bucket, clean bucket. I'm going to empty, make sure this is, yeah, that's good. I always want to make sure that it's processed down to a good size. I'm going to put this into my bucket through a 40 mesh sieve. I just had to go grab that real quick. There we go. I'm going to keep doing that. And this needs to be encouraged through. You're probably not going to just pour this into the sieve and have it go right through. But It's also probably not a bad idea to wear gloves when handling this kind of stuff, because the ash is very alkaline. That's why it's called wood ash lye. They used to use it to make soap, and it can irritate your skin over a long period of time if you're handling it. If you're dipping a bunch of pieces, it might not be a bad idea to wear some gloves as well. Get this to go through some. Grab a paintbrush to help that process. So this brush had a bunch of clay all over it, and I went ahead and washed it out because I don't want to add any clay to this material. That would disrupt its chemical composition. You'd be adding alumina, you'd be adding silica. Clay I've been using contains manganese, or at least a bunch of iron, and so you don't want that. I think anybody who says that making ash glazes is a quick process is just either extremely patient or a liar. It's going to be a minute. Another thing that's important is when you're washing your ash, you want to make sure that you wash all of your batches of ash to about the same degree. You don't want to wash, if you're burning one bale of hay, 1 unit of material, you don't want to wash 1 bale's worth of ash with 2 gallons of water and then wash the next bale of hay with 5 gallons worth of water, or wash it twice, because that screws up the chemical composition, because you don't know exactly what the chemical composition of the ash is, so you want to treat each batch the same so that you have a consistent material. Unless your goal is to wash the ash to a point where there are no fluxes left, which is very possible to do, and in that case you're washing excessively, and 3 or 4 times in that. Then you're basically just left with either pure silica and carbon. There we go. We're now down to pretty much just the sludge. I'm going to try to push as much of this sludge through as I can, and the rest I'm going to add back into the blender for more processing. And this is only a 40 mesh sieve, so I'm not processing this down to anything that's like extremely fine. You just want it to be able to stay more or less in suspension in your glaze. That's all. And ash glazes tend to be very thick anyway. To apply ash glazes fairly thickly, because the ash, as you can see, it's almost more like charcoal than it is ash, and it has a very high loss on ignition, so you want to make sure that you get enough on there so that when that carbon burns off, there's still glaze. Otherwise you get very weak effects. In fact, some of these test tiles even are very thinly glazed. Don't use your favorite blender for this. Breaking that rule currently, but yeah, I'm sure it's horrible for the blades. blender. Also, a ladle like this, I got this at our local Asian grocery store, is just a fantastic addition to your studio equipment. I think that one cost me $6. And so of the raw ash, I mean, there's probably 2/3 of a bucket full. Probably only end up with, I don't know, maybe a quart or two of actual dried, fine hay ash. But that's actually a fair bit. I mean, you can glaze a lot of pots with that quantity of ash. Especially if it's not making up all of your recipe. You know, if your glaze is like 95% Timothy hay ash, well then, I guess make more. I mean, it's not the way that I work, but you can always also spray most glazes and have to make less glaze. That's another option. Although I figure while you're at it, make a bunch. You'll use it. Now, when I burn my hay, sometimes in some of those hot spots of the fire, some of the ash melts together and forms a clinker. I try to kind of search for those in the bucket because those are basically stones, and I don't want to try to blend a stone. I'm sure that's already not being very kind to this blender, but I'm sure that wouldn't be great for it. I'm going to turn off the camera and finish this up, and then we'll get back to it. Okay, so here I've got my buckets of Timothy hay ash, milled Timothy hay ash that I've blended down. So these are going to settle out some more, and I'm going to scoop the remaining lye off the surface, and then I'm going to put the slurry, the milled hay ash slurry, out to dry in the sun until it's bone dry, and then I can use it as a glaze material. I can weigh it back into my glazes. So that's the process. Thanks for watching.